second. Everyone's ready. So the next presentation will be by Arne Hendriks on the incredible shrinking man. This is not his end presentation, but his beginning presentation.
Thank you, Clinton. And thank you anyway for inviting me to come to Tokyo. Great. So, yes, I will be speaking about a project that I more or less started 2.5 years ago, and that's with some other people, and it's basically speculative research about if it would be possible to downsize the human species so that we better fit the Earth. I don't usually do this, but I just want to start off with a video clip. No, no, guys. Well, maybe I don't need it then. Do I need it? What?
Yeah, maybe.
I need it. No, actually, I think the batteries are... But we can watch the video first. It is actually, the project of course is named after the 1956 film The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is kind of a dystopian view of a guy who passes through a radioactive cloud while he's out boating with his wife, and he starts to shrink. And I did a little, I changed the film a little bit, and it's called Reality Repitch.
I was continuing to shrink, to become the infinitesimal. What was I? Still a human being? Or was I the man of the future? If there were other bursts of radiation, other clouds drifting across seas and continents, would other beings follow me into this vast new world? So close, the infinitesimal and the infinite. But suddenly I knew they were really the two ends of the same concept. The unbelievably small and the unbelievably vast eventually meet, like the closing of a gigantic circle. I looked up, as if somehow I would grasp the heavens, the universe, worlds beyond number, God's silver tapestry spread across the night. And in that moment I knew the answer to the riddle of the infinite. I had thought in terms of man's own limited dimension. I had presumed upon nature, that existence begins and ends is man's conception, not nature's. And I felt my body dwindling, melting, becoming nothing. My fears melted away, and in their place came acceptance. All this vast majesty of creation, it had to mean something. And then I meant something too. Yes, smaller than the smallest. I meant something too. To God, there is no zero. I still live.
I still exist, at how it ends, I don't know why. So yes. So like I said, I started this investigation 2.5 years ago because I think we are too tall. We're getting taller, and don't give away my presentation. So most people know that there are 7, actually this graph is not correct because there should be more, it should be higher. There's more than 7 billion people on the planet right now. And everybody's aware of it, it's not new. Right? And also most people know that the people on the planet are still growing taller. So, for instance, if you look at the bottom graph, Dutch people used to be the smallest people in Europe, right up until the half of the 19th century. Like up until like the 1830s, 1840s, the Dutch people were the smallest people in Europe, together with the Spaniards and the Italians. Now they kind of remained small, but the Dutch, they just kind of took off, and now we are the tallest people in the world. And I'm an example of that. And of course, the Japanese actually, they are growing really fast on a global scale. They're really, really gaining ground. That's how they use it. Like still 10% smaller than Western European and American people, but they are really catching up really quickly. But a lot of people don't really take into consideration is that if you grow taller, you don't just grow higher. So you don't just grow 1 dimension, you grow in 3 dimensions. So you grow proportionally. That means that you actually gain a lot more weight than, let's say, if I would be 10% taller, I wouldn't gain 10% more weight. I would need 10% more, but actually much more. And I can illustrate it with a kind of a funny story. This famous chair by Eames, the lounge chair. We've all sat in one once and liked it or not. But there was this story that customers were not happy anymore with the Eames chair because it was getting too small. So Vitra, who produces these chairs in Europe, decided to make it 10% larger so that the customers would like it. And but what of course happens if you make the chair 10% larger is that you actually need 33% more resources to make that same chair. Now in a time of, let's say, resource scarcity, that's just a bad design, a bad idea, I think. And unfortunately, the same thing also goes for people. So if people only become 10% taller, they will actually gain 33% in weight. That means they will need 33% more calories, 33% more energy to transport themselves, 33% more space. And actually that's oh, it's in the wrong place. So I can, yeah, that's just a nice image. No, I can explain why it's there actually. If anybody knows where I can buy this sweater, please contact me. The image is right there because at the moment we are consuming the amount of food that would feed 300 million people each day just because we are, let's say, growing taller. We've grown taller over the past 10 years. So it makes a huge impact on our, let's say, use of resources. That's like the population of America. I can illustrate where I would like to go with 2 basketball players, Nate Robinson and Shaquille O'Neal. Now Shaquille O'Neal is only 23% taller than Nate Robinson. Both of them have played with the Celtics. Nate Robinson is like the smallest basketball player. Shaquille O'Neal is average. And although he's only 23% taller, his weight is actually 78% higher. And again, I think that's bad design, so I think we should take it in a different direction. So where I would like to take us is, let's say, look if you're only 150 centimeters, Shaquille will only weigh 49 kilograms. We all know somebody, you probably know a lot of people that are 150, right? So in Japan, the people that are from here, they constantly meet people that are relatively small. In the Netherlands, 150 centimeters is like the bottom line of what we consider still to be more or less normal. But it would already be a huge difference somehow. But I don't think it's far enough because it's not going to make the kind of impact that we need right now to change things around for the planet. So where I would like to go is, well, that's 16 kilograms a meter. So what I would like is, I would like us to try to become 50 centimeters. And by the way, I know it sounds kind of funny and so, but I would like to ask you to kind of enter this kind of state of disbelief, like the suspension of disbelief, I think the English say, which I really like. Like, I know it sounds kind of funny, but I'm pretty serious about it. Let's say that's the Incredible Shrinking Man. And that's where I want to go, like, you can pass it around. It's not actually a model of the person itself, but it's a doll that sometimes I ask the puppeteers to take this doll out for a walk and just tell me what they see, because puppeteers, they can enter the mind of their puppet and then they see it different ways. And of course, for me, it would be pretty hard to understand what it means to be 50 centimeters. So, but the interesting thing is that at 50 centimeters, you only need about 2% of the resources that you need right now. So that is a huge difference. So we're always talking about, oh, let's try to slow down the increase of CO2 or something, or maybe take 2 or 3% off. But this would actually take 98% off. There he is again, because he wasn't supposed to be there before. So this is some of the other kind of measurements that would kind of fit to the person of a 50 centimeter person. You can just look through it. I'll get back to some of the things later on. I just want to show you, because of course, so you only need about 2% of resources when you're that small, but it would also be interesting, maybe especially in connection to the Still City ideas, that if you would be that small, how would you actually experience space? And of course we would all think, well, space would increase and things would be bigger for us and stuff like that. But the funny thing is that it wasn't really proven that you would see differently if you're much smaller until very recently by the Karolinska Institute. And there's a short video, 2 minutes or something, of their research in which they actually for the first time proved that if you're smaller, you actually see things differently. So everything you see is related to your body. And although we always presume somehow that you do, it was never really scientifically proven. And they did it in a really nice way, so I just want to show this short video. So here's a puppet, and he looks through his little, he looks through like a virtual reality, and he sees what, and that's why he's like touching both his legs, so there's some sort of empathic connection between what he sees and what he feels on his leg. And then he shows him a certain object, and then the guy has to tell him how big he thinks it is. The funny thing is that the Karolinska Institute is one of the most renowned institutes in the world. Yeah, the t-shirt's really good. One of the guys actually is a Dutch guy, his name is Björn, and I've been in touch with him, and I asked him, so what would it, okay, so now we know what it does for space, but what would it actually do for time, your experience of time? So hopefully they somehow became curious and want to figure out that one as well. Thank you. But also, of course, when you're like 50 centimeters, you can imagine what that would do for like our relationship with food. Like we would enter into a world of food abundance instead of this kind of food scarcity problem that we always have, and that is actually becoming especially acute in these years because in America there is like few food, like the harvests have kind of failed this year in many important countries. So actually we would not have a problem. I actually made this little, it's made from balloons. I just wanted to explain to kids why it would be a good idea, because actually kids are for me a much more important audience. Because they can still change something about their size, of course, by not taking growth hormones and stuff like that. something that I really, food is something that I'm really interested in, because somehow I think you can always, somehow the soul of a place always materializes in the way that food is consumed or something. I think in Tokyo as well, that's a very important thing to look for. This is a fantasy. I always work with people and they give me small ideas, and a woman said to me, so, oh, I can just imagine if we would walk through a sunflower field and I would be with my friends, and at a certain moment we would decide to have a picnic, and we would just sit down around the big sunflower, we would just pick seeds, and it would be very interesting. And I thought, oh yeah, that's a great idea, just make a table. Some people here actually experienced it. Hans, you were there, and more Jasper. So I made one with a Moroccan baker. We made a big bread. And I actually tried to kind of follow the Fibonacci mathematics in it, although you cannot really see. And people were sitting around the table picking bread, and I was just interested in very small things, like how would it change social behavior, etc. So it's not just about food abundance, but also about how it socially changes what we do. And then, same evening, as well, we did a dinner party that started at the idea like, okay, so if it would be this small, one chicken would probably just feed like 100 people. And how would that feel? What would that be like? And of course, theoretically, you can kind of say this, or you can just say it and it's fun, etc. But it just somehow didn't feel like enough. So we wanted to recreate the situation of actually being small and eating a chicken. So we went to Belgium, where they have a lot of ostrich farms. And we bought an ostrich. There's the ostrich. Sorry, vegetarians. It's an experiment. It's not because I like slaughtering animals, but when I actually walked into the room and saw that ostrich waiting for me that I kind of purchased, I really felt sick and I thought I'm such an asshole. But at the same time I realized that probably that's a good thing, because now we go to the supermarket and we get a chicken and we just kind of, it's like buying a bottle of ketchup. You don't really think about it, and everybody knows this. But just because it was such a huge animal, the relationship completely changed, and it was really like, almost like eating a person, which we will get on into later. So anyway, we cooked the ostrich as if it were a chicken. So somebody made a big kind of oven thing around it, and then we ate it, and actually I think 80 people were there or something, 80 people attended the dinner, and we had so much meat still left. So it's actually true. If we would be this small, a chicken would easily feed 100 people. And then there were other things that I found very interesting, like just the complete meatness of the event. We were like really inside of the meat. It was so everywhere. Other things that are maybe less kind of, visually interesting, and of course that the amount of garbage that we would produce would be so much smaller. And another interesting thing is that we would already have all the renewable energy that we need. We need about 2, maybe 5% of what we need right now. And just nuclear, which is popular for source of energy here, would already do the trick. Or any of the other renewable energies right now. We would have so much abundance of energy, we wouldn't know what to do with it. Which is a good thing. This is an image of an inverted Tokyo subway. Actually, it's an Indian train, of course, but it somehow, if you read it as a Japanese kind of, of course, we don't have a problem with that anymore. Transport would be an interesting challenge, because of course the trains are large and you would be small and how to deal with that, etc. Maybe monorails on like both sides of the track. Housing. Since we are here talking about a city, still city, it would be interesting how to look at the city. I mean, what are we going to do with all that space? What are we going to do with all those buildings? The funny thing is that Tokyo kind of seems like a halfway house between big and small, because every time I'm in an apartment, I'm always hitting my head, bleeding, stuff like this. Actually, really was bleeding. But anyway, so it would be interesting to see how we do it. This is of course typical Dutch house. I don't know if anybody has been to the Netherlands, but that's a typical Dutch house. Typical change in the future. And of course, what would be interesting is what to do with all that abundance of space. We could let it rewild. We could just give it back to nature, what we've taken from it over the years. We're kind of taking more and more space all the time, and we could just kind of grow it back, or let nature take over again. which is an interesting thing. This is basically where people live, right? And the thing is, so I was going to give a presentation about Shrinking Man, but also about what I wanted to do here, and I'm trying to kind of morph things into each other, like we're talking about morphing two things, so I think it's going to be kind of confusing at points, especially for me, but bear with me, there's some kind of unfinished thoughts that probably remain unfinished right now, but I'm just going to share them with you now so that you can give me kind of critical feedback, and hopefully over the next few days I can do something with those points and make them into a good project. So, the guys from Monic, who created this whole thing, and we've been talking also about Still City, and immediately seemed like an interesting idea what would happen if you would kind of take all that globalization and then concentrate it in one point. So here it's still based in the north of Africa. I think it would be better to kind of create an island just off the coast, and then also a bit more to the north so that it would have seasons. Because I like seasons, and I think a place... the thing about the still cities, I think it's very important that you have some sort of dynamics. Dynamics that you don't have to deal so much with. But if, like, Singapore is, like, for me, Singapore is hell on earth, because it's always the same. And it would be good to put it a bit more to the north. So we're going to try to start a project called 8 Billion City, which is one city for all people in the world in the year 2025, as a speculative research in a way, in the same way that this Incredible Shrinking Man is a speculative research, a kind of what-if modeling. Like, what if it would be like this? And the funny thing is that at some point, and you see this hopefully later, it doesn't really matter how you started it, it's what if it isn't, it kind of goes out the window, and you hit interesting knowledge anyway. Just something, thank you Vincent for pointing this maps from Quinn out to me. So look, there it's already kind of located off, it should be a bit more to the north. This is kind of connected to the idea of rewilding, the idea that we are giving back in nature, and we are concentrating ourselves on one point on the earth, and then what would happen around us? Now Quinn, in the 19th century, 18th? 19th century, made a rendition of the people, paradise, and slowly opening up their scope of the world. So slowly they started to see more. So you will see, he saw Europe and Africa came into it, and he builds this map. At first you just have paradise and a lot of dark clouds, and then the world expands as we are discovering it. But we turn it around because actually we think it's going to be more like this. So let's see if this is nice. So as we live in this city, slowly, and then it just goes. I don't know what this means. It's just, you know, something. It doesn't really matter. It's just the idea that, you know, that we retreat from part of the world, a kind of retreat, and it's related to the idea of symptom that I spoke about earlier, where we near the windows, is that in order for God to allow mankind to come into existence, this is a Kabbalistic idea from the 16th century, where in order for mankind to arrive on Earth, God retreated from a little part of the totalness that he was, because he was everywhere, and he or she, and and there was no space, so he retreated from a little part, and this is the notion of Tzimtzum, and it's somehow interesting. So this is something that I will be talking about Tuesday. This is going to be the 8 billion city as a complete blank. Just a white circle that I will be taking into this city, basically because Tokyo is always the reference city for anything. Like if you talk about a big city, 2 out of 3 times you're also referring to Tokyo. And so I thought it would be interesting to make the 8 billion city into kind of a new reference city. A reference city that's even more reference than Tokyo somehow. So we take all that Tokyo is and then we add some elements that maybe Tokyo doesn't have. But we start off with this kind of idea of just first we retreat from the fullness that Tokyo is, and we'll go into town, we'll put that circle, and it's going to be 4 meters in diameter. We're just going to put it starting tomorrow and see what happens, and see if we see something. And also becomes like a negative space lens. Like everything around the circle becomes super visible all of a sudden. And if that circle wouldn't be there, somehow you would see the whole place differently. You would focus on different things. And just because it's there, you start to open up maybe to some other kind of signals that are there. But this is just presumption. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to start tomorrow. So, it's pretty obvious now that it's a good idea to shrink. Right? It's going to get more obvious. It's pretty obvious already. But how do you do it? It's kind of hard. You know? So, luckily, there are some signs and some signals in evolution that already kind of point towards the idea of shrinkage. And I just want to point out some of those. The first one, the gentleman you saw on the right, is Homo floresiensis. Now, this is a hominid that was living on the island of Flores up until 12,000 years ago. So the latest remains from Homo floresiensis are found 12,000 years ago, and he was living together with us. I mean, this is basically when the agricultural revolution started. And he was only 100 centimeters high. When he had tools, he was making fire. This was an intelligent being, just this tall. Very interesting. It says island dwarfism there, because on islands, strange things happen. Species come to islands, they start to grow very big. Like huge turtles on the Galapagos Islands, or big insects sometimes on Madagascar. But also, some species become very, very small, which is for me a more interesting direction. The theory behind this is also very interesting. Some people say, yeah, of course they come to an island, there's no food, they start to shrink. But there's another theory. There's another theory that says, actually when a species comes to an island, they lose their natural enemies, and they can just be who they were meant to be. So, you know, this very small turtle that became so small because he has so many enemies, he always wants to hide, came to an island, he thought, hey, there's no enemies anymore, and he starts to grow. And if the same were true for mankind, let's say, then maybe we are this size because we are living, well, in this city among 35 million people, in the world among 7 billion competitors. When we get to that island, we can relax, and we can come to our natural size, which is just about 100 centimeters. It would be fantastic if that theory were true, I'm not sure. So this is pygmies from Africa. Actually, they are called Twa tribe. Some people say pygmy is not a good word to use, others say it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of, it means small man. And the interesting thing about pygmies is that they actually have a substance which allows them to deny growth hormone. So if you take an injection needle full of growth hormone, you stick it in the arm of a pygmy, some sort of mechanism starts to work in which they deny the growth hormone. So they actually have kind of an evolutionary response. They are evolutionary heroes and somehow even advanced from us. They know it's not a smart thing to do, to grow taller. Somehow, just incredible, you know, why don't we have this? Why do only pygmies have this? Actually the substance, well, it's just a little in between. The substance that they have, I would like to kind of raise fish that have it, so we can eat fish, and then we would also stay home. But that's another story. I guess back to it at another point. These are the Laren dwarfs. Interesting. They're living in, especially in the Valley of Sindh in Pakistan, and they have, let's say, they miss some sort of transporter hormone, and the transporter hormone takes care of, let's say, getting the growth hormone to the muscles and to the cells so that they grow, but they only have very little of it. So they transport it everywhere, so they kind of grow proportionally, but they just grow very slowly. So they're only 120 centimeters tall, but they're completely healthy, just very, very small. And of course we call it, or the doctors or the medical field, whatever, they call it the Laren syndrome, which I don't use at all, just to explain, but because of course tall people are sick, they must be, but they're not, they're just small. This shows you that our, let's say, presumptions or something, sometimes very hard. Down here, of course, you have all kinds of forms of dwarfism. That's Jyoti Amge from India. She's kind of famous. She's always in all these documentaries and stuff like this. But this is Princess Paulina. That's actually the smallest girl in the world. She's Dutch, for some reason. from a little village called Ossendrecht. She was a huge vaudeville star. Something I also kind of questioned to you afterwards or whatever is I'm very fascinated about this relationship between small size and entertainment. Somehow we always feel the need to incorporate smallness into entertainment systems. The only way we can look at small people is if we somehow put it in an entertainment situation. Otherwise we don't feel, we feel a bit, you know, we get this kind of uncanny feeling. And I'd be very interested to talk about that and kind of speculate on why that is. Why we don't have other ways of dealing with smallness. Big shoes. I put this in for you. Because actually these are the shoes of Taartje Kever, the tallest woman that ever lived. And she was also Dutch, very straight. 17th century woman. So it's not verified, but there's a painting in it's not Hoorn, but one of these North Holland cities. And you can see a painting, and she's really, really tall, like 234 or something for a woman. And these were her shoes, and you can still see them at the museum. The biggest man that ever lived, well, his name was Robert Wadlow. He became 2 meters 72. Wow. Can you imagine? Now they don't allow people to get that tall anymore because. No, seriously, because they die. They die. They die very early. Robert only became 21 years old. I will talk about the relationship between size and how old you can get later on. But what I'm sure about is that actually, if we take all these forms of dwarfism and we analyze them in a kind of a more positive way, like you have equality, you are small, and we look at what is good about them, like their size, and we try to just take out those genetic elements and we put them all together in one person, the incredible shrinking man is actually already out there. Just have to want it. But if you don't like genetics, of course, some people don't like genetic manipulation for some reason. Then there's some things that you can do. Like for instance, you could stop eating cheese. Because that actually really does initiate growth. Because there's a substance in cheese called casein. And the casein, when you eat it, it's turned into casomorphine. And casomorphine stimulates growth hormone production. It's also morphine, so it's also addictive. So we're literally addicted to growth in the Netherlands. The funny thing is that the moment that industrial cheese production arrived to the Netherlands is exactly the moment we started growing. It is exactly. And I know this because some guy investigated it. He investigated the relationship between size and industrial cheese production in the Netherlands. I have to report somewhere if you're interested. You're gonna love it. So you can also, like this is the American, the small house movement, which they already discovered in Japan like ages ago. But the Americans somehow found out about it recently as well. But there's something funny about it, of course. Like there's these guys that want a simple life, they want to kind of, you know, relax and etc. So they build super tiny houses in which they can just kind of, you know, basically any Japanese apartment, and then they write lots of weblogs about it and brag about it and blah blah blah. The funny thing is that because of eugenetics, actually it would work, but it would work over centuries. So it would take a few centuries before people would actually become smaller because they live in small houses. But actually environment does have some sort of effect on your genetic patterns. So blah blah blah, you know. The problem is of course that we don't want to shrink. I know you think I'm crazy and blah blah, but so I have to find somehow the culture, you know, and I have to kind of force something, you know. I know people don't want to shrink. Everybody wants to be bigger. I don't know why, but it's just true. And so when I look at an image like this, American woman with her big car, you know, I'm looking at everything. So what do you do about this? About this bigger is better doctrine? You know, what can you do about it? Actually, I realized that this is not a woman who wants to have a big car, but this is a woman who wants to shrink. So she buys a very big car. She buys a big car so that she can feel small. And that's a very American way of wanting to shrink. In Japan, you would have a different way of shrinking. You know, in Japan they do it completely differently. I don't know what image I'm going to come next. Yes, you know, in Japan they also like shrinking, and somehow they do it in a different way. Like for instance, bonsai. I did bonsai since I was 12, and didn't work. I gave a lecture at Dentsu. It's a company here in Japan 2 days ago, and just before I thought, oh God, these are the Japanese. They really know. They really know about shrinking. You know, now is the time. And so I asked them also about, you know, why Japanese have such a sensitivity or something, you know, to smallness and to the miniature. And so this is something that I'm super fascinated about, that there's a culture that somehow has a completely different sensitivity. And you're not entirely sure where it comes from, you know. Because, of course, we can say yes, because there's 35 million people, etc. There weren't always 35 million people in Japan. So now, just a beautiful little clip about Japanese fascination with small. I think we've all seen these little things, eh? This is just like the top of it.
Wow.
I don't know how long it goes on. I think it's almost done. So my job is to just kind of watch the video like this again and again and figure out why people do it and to try to kind of feel the layers. And because I know the first reasons why it's sort of cute and interesting, I don't know, control. But what's behind it? And if you have any kind of ideas about this, please tell me, because I actually don't think I answered the question. Of course, I've only been quite shortly here in Japan, and it would be interesting to find some sort of interesting and good reasons why they are so fascinated with smallness. So then when I came here, I thought, okay, so you have an American way of smallness. This is about big things and then feeling small and little things. And so this is the American way, let's say. This is a Jim Hagee. He has a website, and I think he's like the world's first shrink tourist. If you go to his website, you literally find thousands of photographs of him next to a big thing. So he plans his vacations along highways, because these things are always on highways, because that's where people go and see them. And he just plans all his vacations and goes to a new big thing that he hasn't photographed himself with yet. Of course, obviously, this guy wants to shrink. And then, so we were trying to get into a capsule hotel today. We didn't manage because it's Saturday, really stupid day to try that, because everybody wants to go out, and tomorrow will happen, hopefully. But of course, I think that the interesting thing about the previous video and the capsule hotel is that I don't think you can come up with the concept of a capsule hotel somehow and really seriously do it if you have some sort of sensitivity for smallness. This is the theory. It's true. It reminded me of Detroit, I think, because they actually had lots of tiny towns there for the war effort. At some point, I think Henry Ford started to contact all the dwarfs in America who were working in an entertainment situation. And he said, I need your help because we're building planes for the war effort, and you are the only one who has the power and the size to go in the nose of the plane and actually rivet the front of the plane. So hundreds and hundreds of entertainers came to Detroit and lived in tiny houses. And actually, I put this in because I had a video. It doesn't work somehow, right? No, it doesn't work. And because in 1939, and this is actually before the war already, they already kind of, they were still part of the entertainment system, but they made this for the World Exposition in New York. They actually built a huge tiny town, and people could go in there and look at midgets. But, so here's giant vegetable growers, which connects to the food abundance idea. And then there's something that I find very interesting, and this is becoming more and more central to my thinking about shrinking. It's microphilia. It's a desire for small women. And why it's so central to me right now is because it really connects to a physical desire. So, you know, once you somehow connect shrinking to a physical desire, maybe it will somehow become true. Right? And here it becomes a bit woozy again, because there's also, we will have a film. Yeah, you know, it's actually Kunagu, not Kanuka. Kunagu. But so there's it's an interesting subculture in the hentai, which is about eating small women. But there's also, and I just because I couldn't really, because it became such a sexist thing about men eating women and so obvious. But I also found an interesting clip of a woman eating men. So just. It's not a very exciting video. I still need to go to the manga store to buy a few, because they have lots of manga stories about this. That's super graphic, right? This is just a very elegant way of showing it. But some of them are really kind of hardcore. So now, connected to the still city, some sort of idea starts to materialize that there's a connection between cannibalism and the desire to shrink, which I'm completely unsure about yet. I said something about it just downstairs before we started. Yeah. Special treatment. Makes you wonder what the meat on the sushi is. Maybe that's probably just fish. Then we go into the boobs, right through. Every Kunaga, actually Kunaga always kind of ends in the stomach somehow, it internalizes. So, of course, eating and this kind of thing, it's extremely intimate, right? Eating is an intimate thing, but eating a person becomes very intimate. As I told before that my first memory of Japan anyway is about a news coverage of a Japanese guy who had eaten his girlfriend in Paris, right? In Paris in the 70s. And I never even considered such a thing as I was just 7 or something, 6 years old when I heard about that. And but the funny thing is that when they tried to take the remains out of the Japanese gentleman who is still alive and well, they also found parts of a bicycle. Interesting. Also ate a bicycle. So he's somehow kind of eating everything that he liked probably. And so it just opens up sort of a notion of a city that starts to eat itself, and by eating itself creates space or something. But I will talk about this Tuesday, so not now. So back to normal fantasies about shrinking. Gulliver's Travels here. I would love to go to that park near Fuji Mountain where they put their Gullivers right there, right? They made a huge Gulliver, almost in a kind of Buddhist fashion, with
They tore it down. It's gone, I'm sorry. It was an abandoned one, and they just demolished it like a year ago.
Oh, that's horrible. I just saw actually images of it in a magazine today. Again, filled with graffiti. And it just looked even better somehow. But, that's a shame. Such a strange site, right? I mean, we would have loved to go there. Connected with the Fuji trip, it would have made a nice two for the price of one. Shrinking. So anyway, films, we've all seen these films. And don't underestimate, let's say, the power of your own fantasy, because when you are small, it is so normal to consider small videos, right? We all have, I don't know, the English ones are Humpty Dumpty, no, not Humpty Dumpty, but the Thumbelina, and so in the Dutch culture you have Pinkeltje and Wiplalavi. Every culture has so many small characters. And of course we've all seen Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and maybe this is like the film in Pablo Almodovar's, what's it called? Where he's actually ants. So we have seen these films. This is some art by Robert Terrian, who creates these spaces in which you can actually feel small, which is interesting. And so I was trying to collect, let's say, create a culture of shrinking. I'm trying to convince people that maybe it's not such a strange idea, and but that's sometimes pretty forced. But then I got an email from America. From a guy named Donald Platt, and Donald Platt is a scientist, and he works for the Florida Institute of Technology, and actually within that institute he works for NASA. And he said, I like your investigation, we're basically already doing it, because we actually want to go to Mars. And if you want to go to Mars, well, NASA anyway, they are obsessed with money and how much it takes to bring 1 kilo up to the space. And so for them it would be much better if astronauts were much smaller and much lighter and consuming much less water, creating much less waste, etc., etc. So this guy is a scientist. He actually already did for several years serious investigation of if it would be possible to shrink cattle, to bring to Mars, cows, other things. And he said, but seriously? We are also investigating if it would be possible to shrink people. Because people are like cows. Anyway. But it opened up my eyes to one thing, Maybe it's not enough to talk about it's a good idea to shrink because, the planet and we need to save it, etc., blah, blah, blah. No, we have to connect it to another desire. Because maybe people would be much more interested in being able to go to, whatever is space, if they were small, and then they would, be willing to shrink. So you need to connect it to other desires like the fact that you would feel like a superhero if you were 50 centimeters tall, because your absolute strength would really decrease, of course, but your relative strength would be so much more than you have right now, because your weight drops far quicker than your muscle strength. The other way around is also true. If you grow, your relative power becomes much less. So I'm kind of weak. And what about, a lot of people criticize me because it's impossible, because our brains will become so small that we cannot, become complete idiots, etc. But maybe, and it's the same scientist from NASA, maybe it would be possible to actually shrink each cell individually. Cells can be much smaller. There's a lot of abundant space. So we could just kind of shrink them all, and maybe the brain would be even quicker because every cell is much closer together, so the distance traveled between synapses, etc. would be much shorter, and therefore we'd be much smarter as well. Interesting, of course. Maybe with all that excess power anyway that we will have, maybe it will enable us to fly. This is Otto Lilienthal, a German pioneer of human-powered flight. He died in one of his experiments, obviously. But he's the guy who invented Delta flying, so lots of people are enjoying his death, or anyway the results of his research. And then there's a very interesting connection between how old you can get and your size. These are Chinese or Japanese. I showed this to Japanese guys and they said, I think they are Chinese. So they must be Chinese. Anyway, very old ladies, and we know these old ladies, we've seen them here as well, they're like this. And they're old, very old, they're very small. And this is not because when you become old, you shrink. Let's say because you do shrink 10% or something, but okay, I won't be this small when I'm 90, if I make it. I'll probably be like this. So it's because there's a real connection between how tall you are and how old you can get. People that are over average, for every inch over average, 2.5 centimeters over average, you lose 1.2 years of your life. And this is actually an investigation done over tens and tens of thousands of people. It is not a fiction of my imagination. If you are taller, the chances that you die earlier, well, it's not a chance, you just die on average always much earlier. Sorry, especially for myself. And then here's the Laren people again. This is actually also Laren. They're living in Ecuador. And these are the Laren people from Pakistan again. Super interesting is that they have 0 diabetes and they have 0 cancer. With people with Laren are no cases of either of both diseases. So you can imagine that both in the case of getting older and of defeating cancer somehow with what they have genetically, that the pharmaceutical industry is now jumping on them. I mean, in those villages, probably more medical doctors living in those villages in Ecuador and Pakistan than there are actual Laren people. But it becomes, of course, very interesting because if such a huge company like pharmaceutical industry gets behind an idea, maybe somehow it becomes more of a reality than you might have imagined, you know, when we just kind of started this lesson. So, for all these reasons, and maybe some other reasons that we didn't have time to talk about, I would ask you to join the growth resistance, join me and some others, give me feedback, and start spreading the news that we should shrink. So thank you very much.
In prehistoric times, dinosaurs ruled the earth, and they were much bigger than reptiles are today. And then there were mammoths, which were like big versions of elephants. And then there was a giant wombat, I think, as well. And dodos were really big, much bigger than chickens and all that. So don't you think that our era of ruling the earth might be what's getting in the way of the shrinkage, and we should actually kind of initiate an apocalypse? So the next species that rules the earth can be much smaller.
This is another scenario, let's say. This might actually happen. It's true that dinosaurs, because they became so big, they became extremely vulnerable for extinction. That's why they were wiped out. You see that all the species that were smaller, they still kind of managed to. And the small dinosaurs, like crocodile kind of thing, also managed. So maybe we are growing towards, let's say, our own extinction. That could be because of evolutionary reasons, or because we just kind of, eat up the planet. So your scenario is probably more realistic. But I also think that we need another scenario next to apocalypse, which is more kind of our scenario, something that we decide. Right? It's nice to kind of feel that there is still an alternative to total destruction of everything that we are. I think. So maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the only way. The only alternative way to your scenario. That would be a good incentive to start shrinking. Thanks.
What did the Japanese say when you were...
Oh, they came with so many examples of when they were small and they were always playing with this, or do you know this cartoon figure, or so a lot of...
But were they aware of the fact that it was all small? Were they aware of the fact that they were playing?
It didn't phase them in any way. They completely agreed with it, and they are very aware. Of course, with bonsai, with Netsuke, with this food stuff, with any shop you go into. I mean, it's part of their culture. It's not something that they are aware of.
That everything,
They're
there's so many things that are smaller than what we are used to. So
Yeah.
maybe it's also a perception.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, but I mean, the miniature, they are aware. Because there's a difference between a small room and a miniature.
Yeah.
And I saw these beautiful I see so many examples of their super sensitivity. It has something to do also with skill, right? There are many reasons why they are so fascinated with it. And they gave a lot of names of things that I still have to look up. I didn't have time yet. So I have a pocket full of papers with they've written names. So really nice. So yeah, they responded quite good. Yeah. So it's still just a start.
All right, cool. If there are no questions, if you have questions, to shout afterwards. yeah, the next thing. Thank you, Arne. Thank you.